go to?
I would leave it to the government of Israel to speak to those. Obviously, Mawasi is one of them.
Congratulations, dear civilized people of the US, the UK, the EU, Canada, and Australia. Here, I'm addressing only those people who have been resolute in their support to Israel's genocidal campaign in Gaza. So if you are one of them, congratulations once again. Your bloodthirsty terrorist Benjamin Netanyahu has once again slaughtered more innocent and unarmed Palestinian babies in Gaza. This time, in an area that Israelis and the US, the sponsor-in-chief of Israel's genocidal campaign, declared a safe zone for Palestinians to move into.
Can you tell us where are these safe zones? Can you just name them, identify where are safe zones in Gaza that people can go to?
I would leave it to the government of Israel to speak to those. Obviously, Mawasi is one of them.
In the latest act of Israeli terrorism, the IDF used more US weapons to burn Palestinian children and babies alive in Al-Mawasi camp in Gaza. Let me repeat, burn children alive in their tents using US bombs. These victims were sleeping in their makeshift tents when Israeli warplanes dropped tons of US-supplied bombs on them, setting the camp on fire and burning children and babies alive. Do you know how the BBC reported this act of terrorism? Watch it for yourself. Watch the dirty design of the BBC and remember who the victims of Israel's latest act of barbarism have been.
Well, the latest reports are indicating that it wasn't just a single strike, but in fact 3 strikes overnight that were targeting various sites in Mawasi, which is this huge tent encampment in the south of Gaza, a location where there are over 100,000 displaced Gazans who've been told to go there by the Israeli military throughout the war into a zone which was supposed to be a safe zone, a humanitarian zone.
BBC's Emir Nader said on his channel that over 100,000 displaced Palestinians were taking shelter. But UNRWA told us in November, which is last month, that close to 1 million Palestinians, nearly half of Gaza's total population, has been forced to seek refuge in this 14 square kilometer area to protect themselves from Israeli terrorism. The UNRWA changed its figure to more than 1 million just a few days ago. But for the BBC, only 100,000 people have moved here for shelter. You think an organization as big as the BBC, which employs 20,000 journalists, doesn't have the wherewithal to keep itself informed about what UNRWA has to say? So try and reason why the BBC would downplay the impact of Israeli terrorism on helpless Palestinian victims. In the same interview, this BBC reporter also talked about the Oxfam report, which painted a grim picture of the aid supply into Gaza. As you may have seen, an Oxfam report had said that just 12 aid trucks of food and water had entered North Gaza Governorate in the last 2.5 months. This was because Israelis were deliberately trying to obstruct the aid supply in their bid to starve more Palestinians to death. The BBC reporter said that the IDF had not reacted to the Oxfam report. But he can add on behalf of the Israelis that Israelis had previously said how they were serious about facilitating aid supply throughout Gaza. This is so cute, isn't it? I mean, so what the Israelis have not reacted to Oxfam's damning report? You can trust a BBC reporter to act as Israeli spokesperson, isn't it? Or am I being too harsh here?
Meanwhile, the IDF hasn't responded yet directly on that Oxfam statement this morning, but they have said previously that they continue to facilitate aid to throughout Gaza and in the north of Gaza.
I really want you to take a moment to reflect on Oxfam's findings. 12 trucks in 2.5 months. Put yourself into their shoes and think if you can survive even for a day in this situation. But Israelis must not be projected in a negative light by the BBC, an organization which you and I fund with our hard-earned money called license fee. Clearly, the presence of Jewish Chronicle owner Robbie Gibb in the BBC board is paying off. Who cares about the famous BBC's impartiality and editorial ethics? This comes after more than 200 media professionals in the UK, including 100 of those currently working for the BBC, wrote an open letter accusing the BBC of pro-Israel biases. I have been highlighting BBC's biases regularly on my channel all through this conflict. But just see this BBC headline. When Israel decided to close down its embassy in Ireland because Ireland had opposed Israeli genocide. In other words, Ireland had opposed the slaughtering of innocent men, women, children and babies. But how did the BBC report? Its headline said, Ireland's Israel stance more extreme than any other country. This is not objective reporting, but a pro-Israeli opinion presented to you in the guise of an objective journalism. The BBC used just 2 words from an Israeli quote and presented to you as an objective headline. Then contrast these 2 headlines. Nearly 70% of Gaza war dead are women and children. UN says, no problem with this attribution. That's what an impartial news organization does. But then, why did the BBC not maintain the similar consistency when it wrote this on Russia-Ukraine conflict? Its headline said, Russia is executing more and more Ukrainian prisoners of war. No attribution here. I can just go on and on and on to illustrate BBC's biases for Israel. But I'll conclude with just 2 more video clips from its broadcast today. See how Ben Brown, my former colleague, interviews Mustafa Abuu from the Islamic Waqf Council and Rabbi Gideon Sylvester. First, Mustafa Abuu, and see Ben Brown's rejoinder in the end in defense of Israel.
What are your thoughts? What are your reflections as we come to the end of this year, another year of war in the Middle East?
The thoughts are that there is still an ongoing genocide in the Gaza Strip. Children, UNRWA have just read a while ago, there's a child that is killed every 1 hour. So the heart is broken, the land is devastated, and people, lives are lost. We go beyond our own community when we think about life. We try to instill hope in people, but the conditions on the ground are deteriorating. The historical status quo at Al-Aqsa Mosque has been violated systematically. We talk about what existed, the arrangements that existed on the eve of the war in 1967. Things have been better under occupation, but things deteriorated, especially with the Ben Gvir being the part of this government and really saying that he would have built a synagogue inside the Al-Aqsa Mosque. On daily basis, Sunday to Thursday, every single day, there's a period in the morning and a period in the afternoon. When the settlers are occupied by the Israeli security forces, they head to the eastern part of Al-Aqsa Mosque and they conduct their own, not only prayers, but also they sing, of course, national Israeli songs. They raise the flag, and within a couple of hours period in the morning and shorter in the afternoon, they are absolutely protected by the Israeli security forces, and this is the direct violation of the historical status quo.
Okay. I mean, you talked at the beginning about genocide. As you will know, the Israeli government, the Israeli military completely deny that, and they will say and do say that they are responding militarily to the attacks of October the 7th by Hamas, that they are determined to destroy Hamas, to stop it ever carrying out another attack like that, another massacre like that, that killed or kidnapped hundreds of civilians.
And now the interview with a rabbi without any such rejoinder, such as Palestinians say, or the UN experts say, or human rights organizations would say that Israelis are committing genocide.
Do you think that has been a proportionate response to the attacks of October the 7th?
I think the first thing to recognise is that one would be very foolish to put one's faith in numbers submitted by Hamas, who are themselves the ones who invaded Israel, burnt down the houses, kidnapped the children and the grandparents, and who are committed to the destruction of the state of Israel. As Yasser Arafat, the leader of the PLO, once said, "If I'm willing to kill for my people, I'm certainly willing to tell a few lies." So I certainly wouldn't trust any numbers that they give, and I think the sense is that those numbers are massively exaggerated, apart from the fact that they always put together the fact that Israel has killed their fighters, and only a small proportion of the number is actually civilians. And the other point, which is crucial to understand, is that in Israel, and I'm not sure you've seen them as much in England, but in Israel, we constantly see the pictures of the Hamas bases, which are located underneath mosques, underneath hospitals, underneath kindergartens and schools. And it's horrific to think of people who are so evil, never mind their cruelty to Israelis, their cruelty to their own people is just staggering. And that degree of viciousness and violence is scary. And again, when you ask about a Palestinian state, I don't think Israelis would want people like that running the government next door again.
But, I mean, just very briefly, we've only got a few seconds left. I've frequently interviewed people like Gideon Levy from Haaretz newspaper who said Israel cannot just keep living in a state of war. It has to make peace.
So I think, first of all, Gideon Levy, and I've read many of his columns, is absolutely on the fringes of the extreme left in Israel. So to interview him, you're not really getting a representative Israeli voice.
Well, we interview lots of voices in Israel, including your own right now.
I'm sure you do, and that wasn't a criticism of you.
Anyway, I'm afraid we're out of time, but it's been very good to talk to you and have that conversation.
Well done, Paul Staniforth, for documenting these clips on your social media page. As for me, the idea behind documenting these editorial lapses by one of the biggest news organizations in the world is for generations to remember how the BBC behaved when innocent men, women, children and babies were being slaughtered live on TV by Israeli terrorists. History must remember the role played by our public broadcaster. That's it from me. Thank you very much for your support of this platform and our journalism on buymeacoffee.com and Patreon. If you do think that our journalism is worth supporting, then you too should consider becoming part of it. In the meantime, if you haven't subscribed to my channel, please do so, because that's one of the many ways you can support independent journalism. God bless you all.